Welcome back, everybody, to We Are TPM with myself, Kyle Teixeira. You're sitting, listening to, and sitting next to John Teixeira. We are back this week to discuss federal housing vouchers / Section 8 program. If you have any questions on this, have a voucher, don't call us, but give us a call otherwise for 817-818-9039. Shoot us an email at showmethemoney at wearetpm.com. Let's get into it, John. This could be a big category, but we have a reason for bringing it up. And it's also something people like to talk about. I guess our initial reason for talking about it today is the Department of Government Efficiency is in the news today about starting to look at the books of the HUD, of the Housing Urban Development, right, which provide the Section 8 program. But their target, at least right now, is to find fraud and waste. Right, that's what they're looking for. We have a lot of experience with the voucher program in Section 8, so let's get into it. What are your
perspective on what it is, and first and foremost, the reason why this is a topic and people know Section 8 is a term because it's been around since like the 70s. And there are investors that I know across the country that have made a pretty good living on focusing on Section 8 housing. Section 8 housing used to be a type of housing. Mm-hmm. Now it's really transformed into more of just funding. It's not a type of housing anymore. You don't buy a certain type of house to do Section 8. You don't look for a certain type of tenant. It's really become a funding tool for tenants. And what that looks like is the federal government funds states fund individual housing authorities, which those housing authorities are sometimes their city authorities, sometimes their county authorities. And they cross borders nowadays. It's strange how we do it, how they do it. But basically, they are funded, given money to give to pay rent, either partial rent or all of rent for tenants that apply for the Section 8 program with those particular authorities. Did that make sense? Did I do that justice?
Yeah, you did that justice. I mean, I think that was generalized a little bit, but
It was.
What's the voucher?
Let's drill down. So the voucher is a potential tenant that needs help with their rent would go to a local housing authority, their housing authority in their city or in their county, and apply for a housing voucher. That voucher, then they'll go through a process where they'll decide how much money they make, how much help assistance they need, and then they'll get a voucher for, let's call it, a 3-bedroom home in Tarrant County, right? And so they can go out now and try to find a homeowner that will accept their voucher, which means accept getting paid by the housing authority for rent. And it's usually competitive, right? There's been times when it's been hard for Section 8 tenants to find a home because they're not competitive. Mm-hmm. And then the housing authority makes an adjustment and becomes more competitive. There's times when you'd rather have a housing voucher tenant because the rent, they're paying even more. But in general, what do you think about the program? In general.
We're bringing this up because of fraud and misuse. And for years, my entire observation and experience with this entire program, those two words have come to mind every time we talk about it.
Well, yes, but before you get into that, as a landlord, how do you feel about it?
I think it has its pros and its cons. I think as an investment vehicle or a piece of your investment strategy, you can formulate good investment strategies around the housing voucher. I think there's pros and cons. I do want to bring up that, I guess most of what we're going to talk about is very specific to the DFW Metroplex, Texas area, because the housing authorities do work at a local level, but in general, they all work at a high level the same way, and then how they execute that stuff, can vary. But it's also not easy to get a housing voucher. At least it didn't used to be. It was for a little bit there. But, they only open it for applications I think it's every year. during like a month. There's like a month every year, kind of like insurance openings where, you know, you can apply and then you may not get it for 2 years. But it's one of those things that like once you do get it, you're pretty much locked in until you lose it.
Yeah,
or
that's
until your
changed a little
income
bit.
changes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's changed a little bit. Actually, there used to be programs with the housing authorities that would help these tenants turn into homeowners and actually pay their down payment closing costs to get them out of the Section 8 program, right? And turn them into homeowners. That's the way it used to be previous to
it's definitely not how it is
previous
now.
to COVID, right? Maybe even farther back than that a little bit, but yeah, I haven't seen any of that happening recently.
Used to be a tool. It's definitely a social program now. Like hands down, can't get around calling it.
Yep.
It's a social program. But before we get further on that, let's talk about the fundamental workings of how it works on like a landlord side. Like, so what's a voucher like? Is it just a piece of paper? Like not really. Like say you're a voucher holder, you get approved for housing voucher. They look at your income, everything. They're supposed to look at everything. Your budgeting, what you make, all the people who live in the home. Yeah, the tenants on the tenant side, and then consider if you qualify, and if you qualify, it's how much. So it's usually a percentage. Like, are they going to pay 60% of your rent? Are they going to pay 80? Are they going to pay 20? Are they going to pay? I've seen it all the way from 0% to 100, depending on how income changes. Because there could be people who get a new job, and now they don't qualify anymore, and their voucher goes to 0, right? So it can vary. But essentially, here's one of the big drawbacks is once you find a landlord that will accept that voucher, there is a process. There is a request for tenancy approval. There's an inspection process, and everything in the federal government, city government, local government, it works extremely quickly. Most efficient thing just kidding. It's the government. It's slow. It's very slow. I think the fastest we have ever gotten a housing tenant from like.
Okay. This is where the separate housing authorities vary.
Yes. Okay. So let's not, maybe I won't give that figure. It definitely depends on the authorities, but like you're not going to sign a lease within a day with a housing voucher, right? Like that's just not going to happen. So there is a consideration of will there be a higher, we talk a lot about vacancy days, vacancy costs. And when I talk about Section 8 and whether with clients and whether it's good, there is a trade-off there. Yes, you may sacrifice maybe a month and a half of rent while working through this process, but there is a much higher retention rate year over year. And what that means is
less turnover.
So housing tenants go through such a hassle to actually get that done, right? Like we've had people who do that month and a half long process, for example, and then like 2 days before it was done, we had to go a different direction, or they didn't get accepted, or whatever it may be. So it's difficult. So they're very unlikely to leave after the first year, unless they lose their assistance. But that's
so. I don't want to give away too much about how we do it. I think we do it the best way that we know how. But to your point, there's been times in the climate in the rental climate when we're able to get tenants so quickly, so easily, we have so many applicants that we would not even consider a housing applicant on a vacant home. The only way we would consider a housing applicant is on a home that's currently occupied by a tenant. They're in their last 30 days of the tenancy, and that gave us that last 30 days to go through this process that you're talking about. And do the inspection right at the end when it's vacant and ready, and go, right? And then there's been times when the market is not quite as good, right, where we disregard that and we go ahead and accept them on vacant properties. But I say that to highlight what you just pointed out, and that is that's how you're making the decision because it's going to affect your vacancy days. You're going to have at least 2 weeks of time that is going to be burned going through this process.
And that's, we always have to advise on what the downsides and pros and cons, and like another, we have
what are the pros? We haven't talked about any of the benefits.
Well,
Because those are pretty
that's what I was
good.
about to get into. So the pros can be, and most of the time the pros are guaranteed rent. You're getting paid by the government. This is also a pro in the assumption that it's 100% of a voucher. Sometimes they have to pay half, and then
Most of them, I'm sorry about my throat. Most of them are 100%, right? They're pretty close to it, if not. We don't have too many tenants. We have had some tenants that are like 50-50, but most of them are 80 to 100 that we have, right?
yeah, it varies. But that's one of the pros. That's one of the pros in theory. I have to put in theory now because
Yeah.
we literally have a client who will not accept housing vouchers based on experience. And I can't even knock them for it because we've now had those experiences, and it's basically the housing authority thinks they have, in certain cases, thinks they have authority that they do not have. For example, to just say an inspection item failed and you're not going to get 2 months of rent. And that's not what the contract says. It's not how the program works. But we have seen it happen. And then you got to fight them. And so fighting with the person who owes you money and it's the government who works slow, thinks that they don't have to follow
Hard to
contracts.
communicate with.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Shows up one day a week to work, goes on vacation. I've gotten, I don't know.
There are certain authorities that we don't even accept housing vouchers from because they are so extremely difficult. So when people call me and say, hey, do you take housing vouchers? I say, yes, we do, except from these authorities.
Mm-hmm.
And when they ask why, I tell them because they're too difficult to work with.
Well, no, the two, while that is true, the premise of it, the two that we have essentially said we will not work with, it's because of lack of performance on their contract. They broke the housing contract and they never fulfilled it. So if you break a contract with us, I don't care who you are, you're not going to get, we're not going to work with you.
We
again.
have other ones that we love because they're easy to communicate with. We have contacts there. We know how they work really well. They know us really well, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have some that we really like. And if you call us with a voucher from them, we're like all in. We're like, yeah, let's do it. But so it really depends on that.
Well, and it's not like we're just going against certain authorities. Like it legitimately is a case of we had no bias in that. We just had something that broke our contract. So
and sometimes it's timing. Like you said, there's no way we're going to take 30 days to put somebody into a home. I would never do that to a landlord, to a homeowner.
90, yeah, and it's ridiculous.
I'm not doing that.
And when you're trying to communicate with them, like this isn't just what's out there right now. This is a lot of what we're talking about and why we want to talk about this. This is observations that we have made. Like
Right.
I have never received more out of office emails from any entity in my life than we do housing authorities. Every time we're communicating, I'm out of the office for another 10 days. I'm like, okay, well, and then we have to put it on our calendar to email this person when they come back from vacation because it may be 2 more days after that they go back on it. Like this is reality.
You're starting to get into waste and fraud, and I know you want to talk about that a little bit. So let's get into that. But before we do, I want to point out that this is something that investors they think it's a strategy. Like, for instance, I'm going to become a real estate investor and do Section 8 housing, right? That's a statement that people make. That's a seminar that people build and sell to other people, so forth. That's not really how it works anymore, and it's not really how you should look at it. A housing voucher or a Section 8 tenant is just another potential tenant that you could accept if you want to, if you know how, and you have the experience to do it, then by all means, go for it. Do it.
Well, and the reason and I think this is what you're getting at, is it should be a good program. Like, it really could be a good program. And it is, like,
Right.
even in recent years, over the last decade, I've seen it go.
Nobody wants homeless
change
people.
What?
Nobody likes
No, we don't want
wants
homeless people. I think these vouchers should exist, but I've also seen the entire experience isn't what it should be.
Right.
Like, and these
People
are
take
straight up
advantage.
observations. Like the rate of fraud, and I'll skip this for now, but it being taken advantage of is one thing, but how it's qualified and how it's used doesn't make any sense to me. So, like, essentially, they could give out more vouchers than they do if they were to use them differently. Like, if a person works in an area and applies for a housing voucher, this is where they work, they don't work. So if you're giving free housing to someone because they don't work and they have 4 kids or whatever, and then these vouchers have been expanded to utilities and groceries and living expenses, and then now you're going to give them free reign to live wherever they want, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to spend $6,000 a month on a 4-bedroom house in an area that you didn't need to live in because you don't work there. Like, it's not even like, I'm not making an argument that I don't think you should live there, but you don't work there. There's no justification for our tax dollars paying $4,000 a month for the exact house that could be $2,000 right down the street.
Let me put it in a different way. I'm going to give you a different perspective. I think you'll appreciate this. I'm going to use example of one of our tenants. Okay. Mm-hmm. No names or anything, obviously. 2 very capable people, very capable of working. Absolutely no restrictions on them physically whatsoever, right? Smart people. One of them is a real estate agent. So we all know how easy it is for real estate agents to, quote unquote, hide their income, mm-hmm. right? And we also know how much real estate agents have made over the course of the last decade. We have had this tenant for 6 years, maybe somewhere in there. They have been on the housing program in one of our homes the entire time. Again, 2 people, as far as I know, working, or at least capable of working. No kids, no restrictions whatsoever. Living on our taxpayer dime. Mm-hmm. And as a landlord, I'm allowing it because of all the positives, right? For the landlord, right? We get paid every month. That's what's important to us. We have guaranteed income that we don't have to worry about. It's not late. So that's what you and I have to worry about, is what we have to worry about. Our homeowners, we have a fiduciary commitment to them. And this what's happening here accomplishes that but we sit and look at it and think to ourselves, we're also taxpayers. Mm-hmm. And as taxpayers, I don't really want my taxpayer dollars going to this perfectly capable couple with no kids, paying for the house for no reason when they're probably making 6 figures.
Yeah, no,
I don't have any evidence that they are, but
I mean, well, and I was going to say this next, not having the program, not only not having an avenue or a vehicle to report and solve this fraud, they actively deflect it. They actively allow it, and we've witnessed it. So, like, we have
again, some authorities do. I want to point that out. Some of them are good, and some of them don't do this stuff.
There is not a federal vehicle to supersede these local authorities and report it to where it gets investigated. That is not something that is available, and is not something that occurs. And the sole fact that it's not available is deflecting it, because it is so obvious. We have some that, like, we know it's fraudulent. We have factual evidence, but we can't do anything about it. And if we wanted to enforce the lease, here's an example. There's people who have used vouchers to make money. They get approved for the voucher. They don't even need it, so they get a free house and they rent it to someone else and they make money off of it. Oh yeah,
we've seen that happen.
I've seen that a lot. But when we find out it happens, we can't just do a lease or an eviction for not being the right person, or any of the things we would do to enforce our lease normally. We have to first notify the authority this is the violation, and we have to give them the ability to try to deal with it first. Well, all they have to do is show up for an inspection that's predetermined, like, we're scheduling an inspection in 2.5 months. So they have to be at the property for that inspection. It all goes away. And we've even had one where they did catch them for fraud, and then they resolved it somehow.
I know.
They resolved it somehow. A month later, they're like, oh, no, housing authority's like, no, they're good. We were wrong. I'm like, you weren't wrong. We've been reporting this forever.
Could you imagine if you don't have a job, you can qualify for this housing program, right? And then go live with your mom and collect, right?
Well, okay.
And then sublease the apartment and collect the rent on it.
This is not speculation. This happened to a client of ours. I have firsthand evidence. He even showed me, and then I researched it. So it wasn't until like 2017 that these housing authority or that the Section 8 program decided to cross-reference between authorities. And this is insane once you describe it. So take DFW, for example. There's like 12 housing authorities. So if I want a housing voucher and I know I'll qualify for one, and prior to 2017, I could go to all 12 of those housing authorities, apply. If I get accepted at all 12 of those housing authorities, I can go use all 12 of those vouchers at 12 houses and rent out 12 houses to people. I had a client, this happened, they had 10 vouchers, and they were collecting rent from 10 different tenants on fully paid houses. They were making over 6 figures a year off the Section 8 program by doing nothing. Mm-hmm. And if they did go get a job, they'd lose the vouchers. So
this is the problem with all social
This is the
programs.
problem with socialism
Medicare,
in general. But
there's Medicare fraud happening all over the place.
But we've been talking about this for over 5 years, that our opinion is, or our observation is that like these voucher programs are, it's not a single digit percentage. No. It's a high percentage of this program is at minimum abuse. And then how it's executed. So, who they give the vouchers to is extremely biased. And I can't really go into, my observation is it's extremely biased in a way it shouldn't be. There's a bias for race and minorities, but those are all actually in law. Ironically, that's what DEI is. But the parts that aren't part of the law, the incomes don't make any sense. So you'll see like some people that get fully compensated because they have to show us. They have to show us at least the initial budget approval. They have to show us what they're getting and why they were approved for this. And then it's like, well, why was this person approved for all this money when they make this much and have, it doesn't equate. It doesn't make any sense. And it clearly how it's executed up at the housing authority is extremely biased. So, that's our observation.
Yeah. And as a landlord, then my recommendation would be consider it as an acceptable alternative to find tenants and to rent your homes, right? But understand it really well. And don't just understand the program, but also understand the specific authority that you're accepting it from, right? If you've never worked with them, then either take a gamble and work with them and then you'll have experience, or ask around to other landlords, property managers, and so forth. Have you ever worked with this authority? How are they? So forth. Because that matters. Each authority, while they're given some guidelines from the federal government on how to do this, they still are all very different on how they do it, how efficient they are, how trustworthy they are, how easy they are to communicate with. All of that matters a lot.
Yeah, and there's rent controls. I mean, it's an indirect form of rent control where it's on the back end, right?
Bit, yep.
So they will approve a certain rent amount. It's pretty generous. It's tightened up, I think, to kind of stop rent inflation. But
you know what? They also make you prove that the rent is legitimate, that value. So it used to be,
and that's new.
Yeah, so it used to be that for a 3-bedroom home, we're going to pay you $2,000. So as a landlord, you're like, well, shoot, yeah, like a $1,500 a month home, I'll take your $2,000. And that was it, right? You got paid $2,000. Now they make you prove with comps that this home is worth $2,000. And if you can't, they're not going to pay you that much. And I appreciate that they're doing that because, again, those are our tax dollars. I want them to go to a good purpose. I don't mind having my tax dollars go toward solving homelessness in my area and in my country. I don't mind that one bit, as long as it's done in a smart way without the fraud and abuse that you're referring to.
Yeah, and that's the problem that, and I guess that's why this is all brought up, and I don't know why it's so controversial, is most of the social programs are rampant with fraud and abuse. So if you just fix it, then it'll be, everyone will feel a little bit better about it. If it's going to exist and it's going to be implemented, then make sure it's implemented right.
And that's what's happening right now. It's making Trump look like a bad guy because he's killing all these things, right? But really, it comes down to nobody minds the end. The means to an end is the problem, right? Well, nobody minds the purpose of it, why the reason why things exist. But when it becomes when it becomes fraudulent or to put money into people's pockets that for a purpose that it wasn't intended for, that's the problem.
Yeah, and I mean, even the things we talked about isn't what they're targeting right now. I mean, while those are fraud and abuse things, they're harder to prove. Like, they have repeatedly said that they are initially trying to get rid of fraud and abuse that is blatant. It is like literally people that don't exist, like, which we've also seen. I've seen that too.
The federal workers thing, the new federal workers thing. They're just trying to find people that we're paying on the dole, right, on the federal payroll that don't even exist. Yeah. And everyone's up in arms about having to answer these 5 questions when all they're trying to do is weed out the fake federal employees.
If HUD did a pulse check, it'd be eye-opening too. I mean, it maybe will, and that's what's been. It's the reason this was brought up is like Doge is going after is not going after is
low-hanging fruit,
auditing HUD now as of like this week, and then the headline is they're gonna the cuts to Section 8 are looming. No, they're looking for fraud and abuse, and people talk about Trump, how he's gonna go cut Section 8. He has a personal incentive not to do that. You know, his family literally owns management companies that are heavily Section 8, have heavy proportions of Section 8 and rent controlled housing. So it's not like. You know, but which is why it's like if I had if they have his son-in-law, for example, huge Northeast property management company, probably, say what you want about the company. But the point is that there's a portion of it that is in the rent controlled space and in the Section 8 space. So they've also probably seen what we've witnessed, because you'd have to close your eyes. It's one of those programs that's like, if you've worked with it as much as we have, it's like, it's pretty obvious. So,
and you know what? On the flip side, I have had to send really good, hardworking people that deserved that money to the housing authority, walk them through the process, and they either didn't know it existed or didn't have the moral capacity to do that, let's say. I don't know what the right word is, but that it wasn't in their DNA to go ask for assistance, but they needed it desperately. And I am walking them through going, look, you're the type of person we need in this program, as opposed to the people that are using it, right? And
someone said to me, some people are morally against groveling regardless of desperation.
Right.
So it's a simple way to put it. And that's not even my opinion. That's what it is. It's just that's what people that didn't want to go apply for the program said.
You and I would go down kicking and screaming before we would ask the government to pay our rent. That's the reality, because of how our mindset is, or how we grew up, or whatever, right? There's other people that are exactly the opposite of that.
Seeing the amount of work that would go into getting approved and getting into a house for voucher,
I could get a job instead.
You can go make that money with the amount of effort that takes. So, this is not to say, this is talking about what we've witnessed. This is not to say that we don't work with them. Like, we've witnessed all this because we are actively involved with working with voucher holders. They're not all bad. They all need homes, right. Like, we don't make these judgments when it comes to us. It's a business decision. It's like, does the homeowner want to take it? Do we have time to take it? Will the housing authority even work in this house? So the same decisions are made, and a lot of times the things that we just talked about that you don't see it until the course of a tenancy. So,
it's definitely
we
easier.
also missed one though, because the other big con, is after waiting the time period it takes to get approved. Once they move in, then the housing authority takes another 45 to 60 days to send you your first payment. So,
yes.
It's guaranteed.
And they do take all that time.
Unless 2 months later they need a correction on the lease, then it might take another 2 months.
There are some exceptions to that. Like some of the authorities we talked about that we work really well with, that we already have relationships with, and they already have our banking information. They don't seem to take as long. They say that they're going to take up to 45 days, but they don't really. sometimes. But you do have to expect that. You're absolutely right. It even says it in their agreement that your first payment will take up to 45 days, I believe, right? But then after that,
But they only have till 90 days.
You should see a wire after that point every single month on the last day of the month is usually when it comes in, I believe, right? Or the last business day of the month or something like that. You'll see that wire every single month.
They have 2 days. Most of them around here have 2 days a month that they cut checks, but that's pretty much the whole government.
Yeah.
That's pretty, I think the Treasury only cuts checks.
So 2 questions for you to wrap this up. Should people accept housing vouchers? And the second question along with this is, should you be a quote unquote Section 8 investor?
I think in its current state, I think 5 years ago I would have given you a lot different of an answer than I'd give you today for the investor question. Because personally, I would have had, if you told me I could have a complex 10 Section 8 units, 5 years ago, I would have been ecstatic.
What would that complex look like?
It's a very easy thing to write a pro forma on. You have and you also, we didn't mention this as a pro, you get basically free inspections. This is what some private landlords use Section 8 for, is once a year Section 8 goes and inspects it to make sure that the landlord is upkeeping it and requires repairs and stuff like that. So if they're remote, they can use it as a form of free inspection.
In theory, what that does also is it forces the tenant to take better care of the home. And that's why they do that. Well, that's one of the reasons. They do that to protect our tenant from a bad landlord, but that also protects a landlord from a bad tenant, because a tenant that's not taking care of their home will and can lose their benefits.
Yes. And then, but it can also be a con. So we'll talk about this is something. I'm not going to say this is the exact reason, but this is one of the things that led to us not working with a certain authority. Is those inspections can result in repair requests or repair requirements from the landlord. For example, when a tenant shoves another tenant into the wall and creates a gigantic hole in the drywall, the landlord's got to fix that. And if you don't fix it within a day, then you're not going to get rent for next month. And I know what I just said doesn't make any sense. So, because it doesn't, so some authorities execute their responsibilities in ways that don't follow the contract. And so, there's cons to how, check into your authorities, I guess. I don't, this really did happen. And the point is that even if it's tenant damage, they can try to tell you that you needed to fix it to make it habitable. This is mainly for things that make the house uninhabitable. When you throw someone into the wall and there's a hole in the drywall, that doesn't make a house uninhabitable. It's also caused by the tenant.
Nor does it make it a landlord responsibility to fix. So you didn't answer my question.
And pay for.
Would you accept housing vouchers as an investor, or would you advise somebody to be a quote unquote Section 8 investor?
No, because
no to the second one.
I know
the answer to your first one because you accept them all the time.
Yeah, but you're asking me, would I be a Section 8 investor where I dedicate to to doing that? Yep. No, because it would give them way too. They've ruined diversification, right? You would have to diversify because of all these cons that we've talked about and the wild card that is now these housing authorities. They didn't used to be a wild card.
So would you just accept a housing voucher for one of your units?
Yeah. Yeah, we'd consider it based on the case. I mean, like I said, we accept them now. We just see the the fraud and abuse. So and so I would act and get experience. So I wouldn't take 10 vouchers from one housing authority without taking one and seeing how it goes, because they're overreaching. They're, at least in our area, there are some that are overreaching. Yep. So they have a job and they're doing something else.
Yep.
So, but I mean, that happens. So.
And they have a purpose, and some of them are good, and some of the people working in those authorities are your typical government workers that don't care. They're there for a paycheck. They don't give a crap about any of it. Some of them are really good-hearted people that are there for the right reasons and trying to do good for our society, right? That's hard to do when you're working for the government. It's hard to do when you're using government funds and you have guidelines. So I get it. It's not a foolproof system. It's never going to be 100% foolproof. But each authority has its own personality. Each authority is more efficient than others. And
and I wish and this is our observation, but we've also seen it and talked to a lot of these tenants and voucher holders. It's hard from their side too. And a lot of people will make the argument that because it's hard from their side, that's a good way of weeding out the fraud and misuse, which is a common argument about some of these programs. And I make the complete opposite argument. No, it's easier for the people who know what steps to take, and the people executing fraud and misuse are doing it over and over, so they know the exact path to get it done. And
that reminds me of one of my biggest red flags.
It's an advantage from them.
Yeah, one of my biggest red flags when I get on a call. So there's 2 calls I get a lot. One, do you take housing vouchers? Okay. So I have a script for my answer for that, right? But 2, the other big red flag that you get, and this should be a red flag to everybody listening, regarding Section 8, regarding anything at all. If you hear this from somebody, it should be a huge red flag. I don't care if you're a property manager, a real estate agent, homeowner renting your own home, whatever. If you hear somebody say and ask you, their first question is, are you a homeowner or are you managing the property? If that's the first question that somebody asks you, then run. Like, that's not somebody you want to rent to for so many reasons. And we could do a whole nother podcast on all the reasons why, right?
Yeah, we've talked about that.
And so I'm not going to get into that, but I was thinking about that as we're talking about Section 8, because that is often how people that know the Section 8 program, that is often their first question, because they're trying to get to those people, right, that don't know, that don't have the experience, that they can one up on, right? That they can kind of take advantage of the system on.
Sometimes.
And so you just have to be careful.
There's a version of that question that's not a red flag. Some people ask, are you registered? Or there is a follow-up question that can turn that into a yellow, green flag, which is, I was asking to see if you're registered with my housing authority. Because they could have already...
I've never gotten that question.
I have gotten that question.
I haven't.
Because they're like, well, I've had 3 landlords not be able to make it through the entire process. So.
Well, yeah, but that's not a first question. I've forgotten that question, but it's not a first question when you pick up the phone. Hey, is this a homeowner? Are you a homeowner or a property manager? What I'm saying is, if that's the first question somebody asks you before they even ask you about viewing the home or anything, then you have somebody that you probably don't want to deal with.
Will you take cash if I don't do an application?
That's another one. We could do a whole podcast on first questions.
Red flags?
Are red flags, couldn't we? You want to do that? Maybe next week we ought to do one called Red Flags.
Red flags?
Red flags.
Get ourselves in trouble. No, I'm just kidding. Well, if you guys have any questions about the housing program, Section 8, federally funded things that involve housing and urban development.
Don't call us.
Don't call us and ask if we are a property manager or a landlord. But if you are a landlord and want help with any of these things, I think if you are doing Section 8...
Definitely call us.
Yeah, definitely call us. There's an experience factor, especially in my few years, that make this easy or hard. So give us a call, 817-818-9039. Shoot us an email at showmethemoney@wearetpm.com. John and Kyle are out.
You go.